Hello folks, welcome to another part in this dungeon mechanics tutorial series. Today we're going to take a look at how to set up our player attack animations, Anim Notifies, and also damaging the enemy player and setting up a weapon and equipping it on the player. It's a lot of content that I'm going to cram it into this next 15 minutes, so I hope you stick around and learn something new. Let's get into the video. In our previous tutorial series, we were actually using our left mouse button to go into the combat state and such. We want to change this function a little because we want to use our left mouse button to actually attack the enemy. We were just doing this for testing purposes. This is not even an input action. So we're going to go ahead into our content drawer, go to your input folder, actions. We're going to create a new input action, and this would be IA_attack. And we're going to go to our input folder, IMC default, add in that IA attack that we just created, and this would be our left mouse button. Back in our third person, we can get rid of this left mouse button, and then let's make it like F keyboard. In our viewport, if you see, sword is actually a component that's attached to the character, and it doesn't have its own characteristics. We want to be able to have the sword switch with a mace or hammer or whatever the case may be, and also we want them to have its own characteristics. To do that, we're going to go ahead and create a new blueprint with our weapon data, and we're going to attach it to our actor by spawning it in. So in my content drawer, we're in the dungeon mechanics. I'm going to go ahead and create a new folder, and this would be called weapons. Inside of this, I'm going to make a simple blueprint class, nothing too fancy. It will be named BP_sword. Actually, we'll do BP_weapon_base. And this base is going to have a skeletal mesh or a static mesh. So this way you can set up either or. If you have a skeletal mesh of a weapon, you can set the skeletal mesh. If you have the static mesh, you'll set up the static mesh. And then also I want to add in a box collision. This box collision is the one that is going to actually trigger our impact. I'm going to go ahead and name this impact_box. Now I do have a sword, which is a skeletal mesh, so I'm going to go ahead and plug that sword in here. So that's how the sword is going to look like. And now I'm going to take this impact box and size it so that it fits the sword perfectly. Just like this. And now select your impact box, go down to the collision section where it says overlap all dynamic. Let's make this custom. And we want to overlap everything except for the player camera. Now right click on this impact box, add an event, and we're going to say on component begin overlap. Now we're going to add a variable to this, and this should be our damage. And this would be of type, you can make it float, integer, doesn't really matter, however you want to do your damage. And that's all we're going to have for now. This is going to be very simple. Go back to your content drawer and right click on this weapon base and then create a child blueprint class. This would be BP_sword. Now you can expand this into adding more and more additional weapons, and they will all share this base weapon class. Now we're going to go to our BP sword. In our base weapon, we already set up our sword. So this is going to take that as well. So let's go ahead and get rid of this skeletal mesh out of here. Leave this as none, so the viewport shows it as empty. And in our weapon sword, we're going to actually select our skeletal mesh and set up the sword here. Compile and save. Now in our third person, we can select our sword. We're going to leave the sword as it is because it's already been positioned perfectly in the arms. So I'm going to just get rid of this actual skeletal mesh. And now in our event graph, we're going to go ahead and hide this sword visibility stuff. And when we go into combat state, we want to go ahead and spawn an actor from class. This would be our sword. And the spawn transform will be the sword transform. So we're going to get world transform. And this is what we're going to spawn in our weapon. We're going to drag this return value and we're going to promote it to a variable. And this would be attached_weapon_ref. So we know this is the weapon reference. And then drag off of this and we're going to say attach actor to component. And the component parent will be our sword. So we're going to drag in our sword and plug this in here. And then the location rule, we're going to make this snap to target. Rotation, we're going to snap to target here. Scale, we're going to leave it as it is. Now if I go ahead and press play, and if I press F, you notice that the sword is still spawning in. Now we need to do our attack. Now we want to create a variable here, and we're going to name this B is attacking. And we're going to do a get and drag off of this, and we're going to do a branch. And off of started, we're going to connect this branch and we're going to check to see if the player is already attacking. If the player is already attacking, then don't do anything. If the player is not attacking, then go ahead and set it saying that the player is attacking. And we want to now play a montage. Now the skeletal mesh component will be your actual mesh. And the montage to play would be in your content drawer where we just retargeted our melee attack. We're going to go ahead, right click and create a new anim montage. And I'm going to not name it anything differently. I'm just going to drag it and drop it into my montage right here. And on completed, I'm going to go ahead and then set this is attacking to false. That's it. It's a very simple attack animation that we're going to be doing. And if I go in game and if I press F, I get the sword. Now if I click, and if I click again, there's your attack. And while I'm attacking, if I click, nothing really happens. And that's exactly what we want. We only want to do one attack. Excellent. So this is a very simple attack function that we're doing. Now we're going to go to our content drawer. In our dungeon mechanics folder, let's open up our weapons and let's get our sword. And in our impact box, we're going to right click on it and we're going to add an event for on component begin overlap. Let's drag off of this other actor and we're going to say apply damage. And this damage would be this damage number that we previously set up, our variable. And you can set up this damage to however you would like. I'm going to set it to 10. Now let's go open up our enemy blueprint. So inside of our dungeon mechanics folder, we have our enemies folder. And inside of it, we have our BP enemy base. Let's create a new variable and we're going to name this health. And this would be of type float. Let's compile. And then this health, we're going to set the value to 100. Now we're going to go ahead and right click and we're going to search for event any damage. And this is basically the function event that comes with Unreal Engine that fires anytime the apply damage function gets called out. So this event damage will automatically fire based on who you're calling the apply damage on. So here where we have the damaged actor, we're setting up as other actor. The other actor would be the one that is overlapping our impact box on the sword. So this enemy event damage will trigger due to this. Now when we take any damage, we're going to get our health value and we're going to go ahead and subtract the damage and we're going to set our health value to this new value. And we're going to quickly go ahead and check if this is less than or equal to 0. And we're going to do a branch and set this, connect this execution pin. And if the value is less than or equal to 0, then our enemy has taken enough damage where the health has reached 0 or below. At this point, we can go ahead and destroy the actor. And if it is false, we're just going to do a print string here so we know that the enemy is taking damage. And we're going to go ahead and say, we're going to type damage enemy. So let's go ahead and test this out. I'm going to go press play, press F. Now I have my sword out and I'm going to go ahead and spawn in an enemy. And when the enemy comes close, I have disabled the enemy's attack animation, so the enemy is not going to attack me. But if I go ahead and press left click, you can see how at the very top, I'm going to get more than 1 or 2 damage enemies. So that means I'm damaging the enemy multiple times. That's because the collision box is active at all times. So if I go ahead and move around the enemy like this, every time the enemy actually touches this collision box, the enemy is going to take damage. So we have to do a couple things. First is we need to go ahead and validate that this sword is only impacting our enemy. So we're going to go ahead and right click and say get actor of class. And this actor is going to be our BP underscore enemy base. And we're going to connect this impact over here. And then our actor of class will be on the apply damage. Now we're going to move this out a little bit, the apply damage. I'm going to go ahead and get this other actor. And I'm going to say equals. If this other actor equals to BP enemy base, then we can go ahead and apply damage. So if the player gets hit by this collision box, then the player is no longer going to be taking damage. So let me go ahead and then if it is true, then we're going to go ahead and apply damage. If it is false, we're not going to do anything. So that fixes the one problem. Second problem is that the sword is always active, so the enemy is going to take damage continuously. So we want to enable and disable the collision box whenever the sword is going to impact. To do that, we're going to go to our content drawer. In our blueprints, we're going to go ahead and find our animation, which is our anim montage right here. We're going to open this up. And right now the anim montage has a notify track for number 1. And if you remember previously, for our actual enemy animation, we have created a enable collision anim notify. This anim notify actually enables and disables the trigger messages through our Dungeon Manager BPI. This was our anim enable trigger collision and disable trigger collision. We're going to reuse this. We're going to use the exact same enable collision and disable collision. If you haven't watched that video yet, I will link it in the description for you, so you can go and take a look at how to make this easy Anim Notify State, so you can create this as well. So I'm going to go ahead and right click, and I'm going to add the add notify state, and this would be BP enable collision. And this, I'm going to stretch this out a little bit so I can easily move it around. Here, when the player has started the melee attack, is when I want the collision to start. So the sword is away from the player. And as the player swings, as soon as we get to the point where the sword has passed all the enemies in front of us, we want to go ahead and close off this notification. So what this will do is it's going to go ahead and run this receive notify begin, which enables our trigger collision at this point. And then at the very end of this, it's going to go ahead and run our receive notify end, which is our disable trigger collision. Now, we cannot talk directly to the sword to enable or disable this collision, because this is going to get the owner of the mesh component where the animation is playing, which is going to be our third-person character. So we need to implement this function in our third-person character. And using the third-person character, we're going to talk to the sword because we have created our attached weapon reference here. So in our interfaces in our third-person character, we have our anim disable trigger and also enable trigger. So we're going to go ahead and implement both of these events. Now these events, we're going to go ahead and drag our reference to our attached. Oh, I spelled attached wrong. We're going to get our reference to the attached weapon reference, and we're going to go ahead and then say get impact box. Should be the last one right here. We're going to drag off of this impact box and say set collision enabled. And here where we have disabled trigger, we're going to go ahead and plug it in where it says no collision. We're going to go ahead and copy and paste this one more time, and then make sure the impact box is the target, and then connect this to enable trigger, and then this we're going to go ahead and say query only. The next thing that we want to do is when the sword spawns in, we want to make sure that the collision has no collision. So default, the collision should be no collision. So in our BP sword, where we have our event begin play, I'm going to go ahead and drag our impact box, and we're going to say set collision enabled. And this one, we're going to plug it into this parent begin play, and then also set it to no collision. One more thing that I've noticed while I'm here is that I forgot to connect this other actor into the damaged actor so we can get proper damage values. So let's go ahead and test this. If I press F, I got my sword. Let me get an enemy out. When the enemy comes to me, and if I move around the enemy, that collision box is no longer impacting the enemy. Now if I attack the enemy, you can see that how it says damage enemy just once. And if I spawn in one more enemy and then bring the enemy into that range where I do my full circle, I should get 2 of them. So each enemy gets impacted once. One thing I noticed is that if I were to swing right now, player does this weird sliding. So what we're going to do is when the player presses the attack button, we're going to disable the player's movement. So the player gets stuck on the ground, and then we're going to re-enable it when the animation is completed. So where we have here montage play after our attack, we're going to move this out a little bit, drag our character movement, and then we're going to say set movement mode. There's a whole bunch of different options here. We're just going to set it to none and connect this here. And then once the animation is completed, we're going to go ahead and set this to movement mode to walking. We can do it on completed or on uninterrupted, and also on blend out. We can go ahead and do that. So if I go ahead and press play and press F now, and then if I move around and if I attack, you see the player stops, attacks, and then the player is ready to move again. Attacks, stops, and the player is good to go. All right, folks, I think this is a great spot for us to stop our actual player attack functionality. I hope this video had helped you. If it did, you can support this channel by clicking on that like button. And also you can subscribe so you can get notified as soon as my next video gets released. Next one's actually a fun one because we're going to look at the combo systems in Unreal Engine. So if you don't want to miss the combo system in Unreal Engine, I would highly recommend if you could hit that subscribe button so you get notified as soon as that video gets released. Now, thank you folks for stopping by, and I'll catch you on the next one.